Purse.
Hello.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Can't complain.
You're looking very merry tonight.
Very merry. I went
Very
and
merry.
got my new glasses today. Uh,
Ah,
well, I got them. What do you call it? I ordered them. It's going to take a couple days for me to get them.
so that's what is making you merry.
Oh, I
The
guess. We got.
the
I
top
think
of
I
your
have.
head is a little bit cut off.
Oh, because my camera fell. Hold on. There we go.
Right there we go.
My insurance covered almost all of it. I only had to pay $70 for the damn things. I don't think that's happened in years.
No, that's wonderful, isn't it?
We had some new insurance coverage this year, so that was happy days.
That is happy days.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're waiting for Andre. He said he had a meeting. He might be a bit late. Hello, everybody.
Hi,
This is
folks.
the in-depth show, and I'm here with Lisa Theobald, of course, and I'm here with myself. I'm Joe Firestone, in case you don't know. And
And Andre's coming. Andre Stackhouse is coming to talk
Andre,
about Medicare everywhere.
Stackhouse is coming. He's going to talk about, yes, Medicare for everywhere, okay, or Medicare for all everywhere. But he's also going to talk about whole Washington, too,
Yes.
since he's the campaign director for whole Washington and their effort to pass single payer in the state of Washington. So this is going to be very, very interesting, and we're really looking forward to it. And I see Dolores is here. Hello, Dolores.
Hey,
Brandy
Dolores.
Weaver is here. Jeff Denton is here, and Michelle DeVilliers is here. Hello, Michelle. And Lana Dell is here. Hello, folks. And guess what? Andre Stackhouse is here already.
Yay. Hi, Andre.
Andre, how
Hello,
are you?
everyone. I'm doing well. Wanted to get here right at the beginning so we'd have as much time as we need.
And you did get here right at the very beginning. Very little time has passed. So it's very good to see you. Uh, we would like to learn about what's going on with whole Washington, what's happening, and how things are going. And we'd also like to learn about what's going on with Medicare for all everywhere, okay, as well. And so we're going to give you free reign to talk about it all, and we'll occasionally introduce some questions and some comments. And all together, we're going to have a real fun conversation tonight.
Well, right on. I think I'm in really good company tonight. I think I've got a great audience for this discussion. I think folks here are this is probably one of the most familiar audiences with the work that I do. But I would like to kind of take it back to the beginning. I think that we can get so into the campaign with all the things that we need to do that we sometimes get onto a show like this or get in front of a voter or something and we just start going off about whole Washington and I-1471 and this and that, and people, they don't have enough grounding in the basics to follow what we're talking about. So whole Washington is an organization that was founded in 2017. We are a nonprofit 501c4. And it has been the goal of whole Washington to pass, universal single payer healthcare in Washington state and the country. So we believe in healthcare as a human right. We think it's something that we can provide to all people in the United States. And we see this as something important to pursue at both the local level and the federal level. We also believe in multiple paths. So if we're talking local, we believe in both the legislative path as well as the ballot initiative path. And we, in fact, think that these paths are related to each other, that they don't exist as independent vacuums, but that, in fact, they they feed into one another. They progress together. They regress together. And so that's sort of to lay some groundwork about what Whole Washington is and what our goal is. We are best known for our ballot initiative campaigns, and there's a few reasons for that. The biggest reason being that ballot initiative campaigns are about taking it directly to people. So if we had a legislative campaign, you might actually never hear from us, right? Because we'd spend all of our time in committee hearings and that sort of thing, talking to legislators, talking to policy people, and you, the public, might never really hear about it. Obviously, campaigns across the country, like Campaign for New York Health and CalCare, are taking a legislative approach, and we do hear about them. And largely it's because they try to organize grassroots campaigns to flip legislators, to build that support. But we think that the ballot initiative gives us that kind of that most direct path. And so we take the policy directly to voters and we put it on the ballot ourselves. And then that gives us the ability to vote it up or down as a state. And that means that we have to bring in a ton of volunteers. We have to talk to a ton of people. We have to build a ton of awareness and word of mouth. So even though we pursue all of these different approaches, we tend to get the most visibility for our ballot initiative campaigns. And we're running one right now.
Okay, so just a couple of clarification questions. When you said at the local level, you were also thinking of state level.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said state level. I will say that, at some sense, there's an old saying like all politics is local.
Yes,
so
well,
we do have efforts at local level to organize people, but even we have an entire city council that's endorsed Whole Washington. So that's the Aberdeen City Council, and then Seattle was actually the first city to pass a citywide Medicare for All resolution. Now it's a non-binding resolution. It doesn't actually get people health care, but it still gives us that mean to organize people at the local level and then build that relationship with our legislators and our local governments. And again, all of these things feed, right? Because state legislators often come from a city legislature before that, or, even just the relationships, the personal relationships between people at city and state level, all the way up to national, right? So building that support at these different levels builds the sort of institutional support within the government that is going to be necessary to make these things happen.
Okay, so the second of my clarification questions is that since this is a ballot initiative campaign, it begins with doing things from the bottom up. You're organizing almost from the first, the kind of campaign that is a bottom up campaign.
Absolutely. And, there are different ways to do ballot initiative campaigns, and this is about the most bottom up way that you can do it, right? So one way to run a ballot initiative campaign, there's an activist in Washington, if you want to give him that title, named Tim Eyman. He's arguably the most well-known political activist in Washington state. But what he really is a guy that is funded by big money to run ballot initiative after ballot initiative after ballot initiative to basically cut taxes. And the thing is, the way that they run these ballot initiatives is, one, they're just completely bankrolled. So they just pay for it. They get it on the ballot. They often don't pass, but even when they do pass, they almost never have any actual teeth because they don't follow the sort of constitutional process of Washington state. So they just, they sometimes will pass and then just immediately be slapped down because they're not legal. So Whole Washington, on the other hand, is completely volunteer run. And that's, the leadership to the signature gatherers to everything. It's very low budget, so we don't have big donors. And we, if you look up our campaign expenditures, like most of it's going to be going to printing the initiative forms themselves. And so, I would say that even among the other ballot initiative campaigns out there, a lot of which are bottom up in terms of their strategy. I mean, we're just sort of bottom up in terms of everything.
Okay, I thought that was a very important question to ask, and also to have the answer so that it could be clarified for people. So this is a very different campaign from the California campaign for single payer. And it's a very different campaign as well from the New York health campaign. They do have demonstrations there and protests, which they organize from time to time, but on a day-to-day basis, it's not a bottom-up campaign. Is that correct?
I wouldn't, I mean, I think it comes down to a little bit how you think of it. I personally have, done phone banks for CalCare. So, I think that there's a way for pretty much anyone who wants to be involved to find a way to be involved with these campaigns. But I think a lot of the times there's a little bit less of a call for that, just because, the role of it, even if you do get involved, a lot of the times it'll be, well, can you call your legislator, right? Can you go to this meeting? I think that whole Washington and ballot initiatives in general really give people that clear call to action, which is like, you know what? We need signatures, right? And we're gonna get sheets into your hand, and then it's up to you. Like, when do you want to gather signatures? How? Do you want to invite a friend, right? Do you want to come to the meetings? Fine. Don't come to the meetings. Gather signatures on your own time, right? Like, it's I think, very open, and it provides a lot of that room for self-direction. A lot of, and it's just so in person, like, I think a lot of these ones have moments where they go out there, and gather signatures in the street or assemble. Sorry, they might gather signatures, but they might assemble in a place or what have you. But we really have full license to go all across the state of Washington, a farmer's market, a post office, and even just the smallest parade, right? It just gives us a reason to be there and strike up this conversation with voters and say, would you like a better healthcare system? Would you sign for it? Would you like to get involved with the campaign?
Okay, you indicated also before that to organize in this way and to work at the local level and work at the state level, okay, and also work at the federal level from time to time, has or creates, okay, a networking effect, so that the movement isn't even a simple bottom-up movement, but it's a multi-level movement, okay, and it's a networking movement, and there's a lot of self-organization in that movement that keeps it a dynamic, okay, and growing movement. Would you care to expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. And this is going to touch on to some of the work that we've begun to do through Medicare for All Everywhere. I think a lot of that is just kind of continuing from work that's been done at the state level by a lot of different organizations, including Whole Washington. But, the way that I think about it is, a lot of the times when I go out there and I ask someone for a signature and I say, well, this is to get a statewide system, kind of like Medicare for All. It's, universal healthcare. One of the most common reactions I get from people is, don't we already have that? Right. And so the kind of the first thing that you need to do is raise people's expectations, right? One, by explaining to them how we don't have anything close to universal healthcare. So that's just bringing awareness to it. And then two, even meeting them where they are. And we say, you might have healthcare, right? But we're talking about health, like stability, right? We're talking about having all of your healthcare needs covered regardless of your ability to pay, right? We're talking about you keeping your healthcare even if you change jobs, right? Or get a divorce, or any number of ways that your life situation might change. We have very unstable healthcare under our employer-sponsored insurance system. But the point here is that when we're talking about gathering signatures, 400,000 signatures, that is the potential for us to bring 400,000 people, getting them to take that first step from, I'm somebody who doesn't think about this, I don't necessarily consider this an important issue to me, into, we're asking you to take the first step, which is, we have gone and found you. We've come up to you and started this conversation. All we're asking is for a signature, right? And so when you get them to take that first step, they go from a well-intentioned voter living their life to somebody who has now taken action on healthcare, made it an important political issue for them, right? So we basically think that it provides that funnel that we can start to work people up, right? Some people will just sign and move on with their day, right? But others will say, well, I would gather a signature, right? If you give me a signature sheet, I'll just ask my family, right? Um, and so again, that takes them from somebody who signed to somebody who's now a volunteer. They're active, right? Well, once they're in this campaign, right, and they're gathering signatures, it has a very radicalizing effect. It turns it into something that you're personally invested in and you're trying to make happen out in the world. And it means that gives us the means to start to provide things like training and education, right? So we begin to talk about this issue more holistically, because they're like, I was out there gathering signatures and somebody asked me, what about this, right? And so then we say, okay, well, we have an answer to that question, right? So they're learning about the policy, right? And they're learning more and more about how healthcare affects their lives and people's lives. And so that begins to provide that means for us to talk about the relationship between national and state, right? So we might bring 100 people in to gather signatures, but then, when Seattle Indivisible calls a meeting with the staffs of Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell, two senators who have not endorsed Medicare for All, we've got a mailing list with 100 people who are now taking action on healthcare to say, please show up to this meeting and please ask Patty Murray and Senator Cantwell to co-sponsor Medicare for All, right? So it gives us that means of bringing people in, but we can direct them to different parts of this work, depending on their interests, depending on their availability, and depending on, the strategy that we are currently, working in. But and that's the other thing, right? Is like these initiative campaigns, the signature gathering part is not necessarily 100% of the year, right? So when we don't make it onto the ballot, that gives us that opportunity to go back to some of the other things, coalition building, legislative lobbying, hearings and marches and that sort of thing. So these things are very dynamic, and they're interconnected, right? Which is why we kind of will see that focus shifting at times based on what is most strategically impactful at that moment.
And so that relates to Medicare for All everywhere as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I would just throw out there, just as full disclosure to this audience, Medicare for All Everywhere is a group that I helped co-found, and right now we don't have a formal membership, we don't have a steering committee, we don't even have a website, but Dr. Firestone and Lisa have both been early contributors to this organization. So I really thank you for your support. And I think that, it's good for folks to know that. But yeah, Medicare for All Everywhere is basically the idea that if you look across the country, right? Well, I'll start it in a slightly different place. And I have slides for this. I don't know if that's something that we would want to get into, but
Well,
We always like
Feel
visual aids.
free.
tell you what, I will give you the standard Medicare for All Everywhere
Harvey.
slide deck,
Okay.
And we will see where that leaves us. So
Okay, go ahead.
let me know if this is visible to you and if it looks good. Oops.
I'm going to add it to the stream.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Okay.
And my slides are taking a sec to pop up. There we go. Okay, we running?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Medicare for All Everywhere. It's a new group. We only had our first meeting as Medicare for All Everywhere last October, and in less than a year, we've organized some pretty impressive events that I'm very happy with. But this is me. So I came into activism really through the Bernie stuff, like so many other people. I think Bernie really helped me understand the importance of healthcare as an issue. So I probably wouldn't have said that it was my top issue before Bernie, but ever since then, it's been my number one and probably number two and number three issue. But I've been with Whole Washington for a couple of years now, and I was a state and national delegate for Bernie in 2020. I'm on the Seattle DSA Healthcare Working Group. I'm the co-chair there, and I'm on the steering committee for DSA Medicare for All. That's the national Medicare for All campaign that Democratic Socialists of America runs, and then led the March for Medicare for All last summer in Seattle, July 24th. Here are some of my co-founders. So Terrence is on the ballot for state senate. Made it. Really proud of him. And has a really interesting career that spans international relations to tech entrepreneurship to restaurant working and stuff, and now an independent candidate for the state senate. But out there in Massachusetts, repping Medicare for All and Mass Care. And then Betty is from California, has an incredibly distinguished career in this space, worked with Poor People's Campaign, and also did a lot of work with Bernie. Single Minded for Single Payer ran these fantastic sort of photo petitions for CalCare that you might have seen in January. So really fantastic co-founders of this group. But, kind of getting back to the beginning, right? So we start with Medicare for All, and we want to figure out how are we going to pass it. And then we start to look at the things that are blocking it, right? So we have a president who is on record saying that he would veto it. In the Senate, we have all sorts of blockers, including, that Bernie Sanders one used to say, I'll introduce it eventually. Then I updated it to say, I'll introduce it on May 12th, and I should have actually removed it. Bernie has introduced it in the Senate, so that's great. But the Senate is probably still our biggest barrier. We have Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, who always find ways to water things down and kill it. We have the parliamentarian who successfully managed to keep the $15 minimum wage from happening. Somebody that most people don't think should really have a strong role in something like that. And then the filibuster, which is wheeled out to kill just about everything that we'd like to see pass. And I just want to take this moment to throw this out there, right? The filibuster is not a law. It is not in the Constitution. It's a rule of decorum, I guess you could say, maintained by the Senate. The Democrats, they control the Senate. And anytime they say we can't do something because of the filibuster, they're saying, well, we prefer to keep the filibuster in place. We think the filibuster is more important than whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, gun control. So the Senate is an incredible barrier. And then the House, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, has a lot of co-sponsors in there, but they're waiting for permission from Nancy Pelosi to even vote on it, right? And so we ask ourselves, how are we going to get past that? And I think that this Plank 2 from DSA's 2021 organizing guide said it really well. The realization of Medicare for All will not...
Before we get in,
go for it.
To Plank 2, if you could move back just a slide. Okay, I just want to say something about the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian is strictly an advisory role in the Senate.
Right.
Okay, it's not binding at all. In other words, the parliamentarian gives an opinion. Okay, if the Democratic Party wants to ignore that opinion, and if it has the consent, of all the senators, they can simply ignore the opinion. If the Republicans decide that they want to make a point of order concerning the opinion and say that it should be followed, then the point of order goes to the president of the Senate, and the president of the Senate is the vice president.
Exactly. So,
And the president of the Senate can always hold the vote, have the Democrats vote, okay, and declare that the point of order, okay, is voted down. So the parliamentarian doesn't really have the power to kill anything. It goes back to Joe Biden, okay, and to Kamala Harris, okay, and also the Democrats as a party. And so it's they collectively who are not willing to do it. Of course, what they would say is that, well, it's those villains, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. But even that is not so, because there are probably another 8 to 10 Democrats who would be blocking it if Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema had not simply decided that they were going to be the villains. So it really comes down to a very few people inside of the Senate, and also the opposition of the president and the vice president.
Yeah. So Medicare for All is an incredibly popular issue, and it has a ton of public support, but important power brokers effectively oppose it, right? And the parliamentarian and filibuster are kind of maybe slightly more illusory than some of these other ones, but I think what you're describing is often referred to as the rotating villain, and that is to basically minimize the attack surface of these people by consolidating the blame to these single basically people who are willing to take that blame for the team, and shelter everyone else from that criticism. And we saw that with CalCare too, right? Is that like we're gonna not vote on it because we don't want people to have to vote against it. So it's very powerful, and it can be really disorienting to organizers. But yeah, we need to recognize who has the power here, and to effectively keep our eye on the ball. So I do appreciate that.
Okay. Oh, there's a good illustration of the lack of power, okay, of the parliamentarian, because when the Republicans came in and took control of the Senate in 2001, and they found themselves opposed in relation to a reconciliation bill by the parliamentarian, what they did at that time was to fire the parliamentarian and get themselves a new parliamentarian, and pass their bill anyway. So that shows the parliamentarian literally has no power. It's just an advisory position. It's the person who I believe makes $160,000 a year, just as a civil servant for the Congress. And in the Congress, of course, it's the senators and the representatives who are supposed to have the power, and not the civil servants who advise them. So I thought it was important to point that out anyway. Anyway, go ahead with the presentation. I'm sorry to have derailed it a little bit.
No worries. I think it's great. So plank 2 of the organizing guide says the realization of Medicare for All will not happen in a vacuum, nor will it be handed down from the top. It'll be won through a bottom-up mass movement. And in order for that to happen, the grassroots efforts at the local, state, and regional level need to be built and interwoven. So that's sort of a really good articulation of what I've already been saying, and sort of my feeling on it. I think it's a really well-defined strategy. So, it's a little bit weird. Sorry, let me just check my slides here. I might have put a few things out of order. So normally I put this guy. No, okay. I'll just do the slides in order. Whatever, right? So, so basically, in terms of healthcare reform, I think there's 2 really telling stories that help us chart some of this path. And so on the left, we have Saskatchewan. That's the red province highlighted there in Canada. And that is where their healthcare revolution began, right? And so Canada has a wonderful single-payer healthcare system, but it was passed in a single province, Saskatchewan. And the history there is super interesting. We've done documentary screenings on it in the past, but Saskatchewan is not an urban province. It is not a liberal province. It's a conservative and rural province, and yet it was a socialist movement that managed to get a socialist. I can't remember the name of the governor of a province. It's like I can't remember, but Tommy Douglas was the guy.
Douglas,
Tommy Douglas ran as a socialist and won, and was the effectively the governor of Saskatchewan, and made Medicare happen there. And it was so popular that eventually it covered the rest of Canada. And we often say that we want Washington to be the Saskatchewan of the United States. I'll just extend that and say I would love for California or New York or Maine or Colorado or any other state to also be the Saskatchewan of the United States. But the point is, we think that passing it in one state has a pretty big influence on the federal policy, because if we look at the United States and we see that state, Massachusetts, that one is highlighted because the last federal reform in the United States was Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And before that, it was known as Romney Care, and it came from the state of Massachusetts. So the states have incredible influence over federal policy. And what we're trying to do is put a good option on the table via the states, really so that when there is that moment of federal reform, we are able to very, very convincingly demonstrate the superiority of single-payer healthcare. We can say it's in Washington. It works really well. It's saving money. It's saving lives. You have people who visit Washington, right, or start their life in Washington, but move somewhere else, who are aware of this and can proselytize it. So anyway, the states have incredible influence over federal policy. And I use this as a little case study for how this kind of thing can work and how it often works in ways that are not entirely intuitive. So growing up, I was always told that the Electoral College was basically an unchangeable institution in the United States because it's in the Constitution. So the only way you would ever get rid of the Electoral College in favor of something like, say, a popular vote would be to amend the Constitution, which is just an incredible hill to climb, probably not that likely to happen. And then I learned about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And what that was a group of people who recognized that the Constitution does not say that the Electoral College has to work the way it does. It basically says each state can appoint, they can give their electoral votes however they see fit. And so the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact recognized that if they got enough states such that they have between them 270 electoral votes, which is enough to elect a president, and they mutually agreed that they would give their electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote, then they would basically turn the United States into a de facto popular vote without amending the Constitution. So the important thing here is that it's not that California can get rid of the Electoral College or New York. It's not that any state can abolish the Electoral College, but the states can, because the states have great power. And you'll see, on that chart, a lot of states have already enacted it, and there are many pending. And this is arguably the most serious challenge to the Electoral College that that I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Also the greatest challenge I've ever seen to it.
Right.
As well, in my longer lifetime.
So when we start to think about, what exists at state level and what exists for healthcare, this is just a sampling of the organizations that we have. But you see Washington, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Colorado, California, New Mexico, Maryland, New York, Connecticut, Oregon. These are all states that have these wonderful statewide organizations that in, I think, all of these cases are pursuing one version or another of statewide single payer. And you can start to see that coalition forming here, right? This is a pretty geographically diverse set of states here. And it's also just, there's a lot of really great work happening at these organizations. And so that brings us to the question, well, what about a coalition of state Medicare for all organizations? And what do we mean by that? Well, there's a lot that we're still sort of figuring out with that. But the basic idea is that in order to be a partner of this coalition, we're trying to create a coalition that includes every state. And we want every partner to be supportive of both state and federal Medicare for all. And then we want those organizations in that coalition to make their decisions democratically and decide, the path forward and the strategy from there. And we think that this will create a really, really broad-based campaign for single-payer healthcare at state and federal level that will build the sort of mass coalition capable of passing federal, national improved Medicare for all. So to get into like some of the ideas that come from this, right? Modular Medicare for all. What is this? It's the idea of regional public health insurance plans. So obviously it's difficult to pass single payer healthcare. The first state is going to be by far the hardest. But there's no reason it has to end at a state line. So for instance, Washington, Oregon, and California, there's no reason that they couldn't form like a left coast healthcare alliance and cover everyone. And you start to see greater savings. You start to see an economy of scale building out when you add states. And there's no reason that it can't expand to cover large portions of the country or maybe even the entire thing.
Right. And the 3 states alone constitute a block of roughly 55 million people.
Right, exactly.
On that order, which is a huge proportion of the United States.
Yeah, if you look at just the
United States.
If you look at just the uninsured population of California, it's enough people to fill an entire country, so that's the kind of scale that we're talking about in terms of like people. So another idea that we have talked about is cross-state fundraising. And the idea here is that if you have multiple states come together and raise funds together, but then share those funds at the end of that, we can kind of have a rising tide that lifts all boats, right? So not all states, some states are densely populated and wealthy. Some states are more spread out and less wealthy. Some states have very well-developed healthcare campaigns, and other states don't have one at all, right? So you can imagine if some of these states come together, like let's just say New York, California, and Maine were to do a cross-state fundraiser, and they raise money together, and then at the end of that day, they split it 3 ways between those 3 states. What might be a little bit of money for California could be a ton of money for Maine. And so you can see how the strength of one campaign can be applied to increase the strength of another campaign, spread that network, bring more people in, and give us more chances. One thing I often forget to say in this presentation is, the more of these campaigns we're running in the more states, the more that the opponents of it have to split their attention and their resources. So we're trying to consolidate our efforts in order to split theirs.
Yes.
And then the last one, cross-state phone banking. And really, it can apply to social media. It can apply to any number of things. And in fact, even volunteers on the ground. So the best example of this is one of the actions Medicare for All Everywhere organized in the last year was we traveled to Maine so that we could collect signatures for their healthcare campaign. And even though we only sent 3 people, we were able to collect hundreds of signatures over just a long weekend. But the idea here is that legislative sessions come and go, campaigns end, candidates, they win or they lose. They lose and they go away, or they win and we never see them again. But the movement for healthcare justice never stops. And so just because the New York Health Act, ended in the last week or so, right, does not mean that all of those people should just hang around and wait for them to run it next year, because whole Washington needs help now. And so we want to create those ways for people, no matter what state they're in, to provide support for real campaigns that are active and have a shot of making it. And so we think that this is a way that we can build sort of like a standing army of, experts and volunteers in in healthcare justice who are happy to work on campaigns no matter what state they're in, no matter what time of year, provide that support that these campaigns need at the national level. And then I get into some areas in which the states are different, which I find is very interesting. So it's often said that states can't deficit spend, but I went ahead and looked into that, and it turns out that some states can. So the reason people say that states can't deficit spend is basically because many of which did this in the Reagan era, but a lot of states passed balanced budget requirements. And so the point here is that it's just the law. It's just a law that could be changed. If the federal government had a law that said they had to have a balanced budget, then it would be the same there. But not all states have these laws. And you'll see that Wyoming and North Dakota do not have balanced budget requirements. And so the observation here is just that we need to use the advantages we have in every state. And you might not think of North Dakota as a state that is a prime candidate for, state single payer, but we might not thought of Saskatchewan as a state for that. You might not expect North Dakota to be able to deficit spend, but it could play a critical role in establishing universal health care in the United States. And we'll come back to North Dakota in just a minute. Did you have anything you wanted to say about this one?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is that the one state inside the U.S. that has a state bank, the state public bank, of North Dakota. State bank, of North Dakota is a public bank. And the public bank, of course, would have the capacity to support a state-level healthcare plan that was in difficulty for a year or two by simply lending money back to the state. And so that would give the state more flexibility to make a single-payer program fiscally sustainable. Of course, it would be easy for many other states to establish a public bank as well. It's just a question of a movement starting up, and spreading across the country. The background of the Bank of North Dakota is that it was founded, if I remember correctly, in 1919. So it's lasted for more than 100 years. It's been very profitable, very fiscally sustainable. Its levels, of profitability compare extremely well, and in some ways better than the Wall Street banks. So,
and
that's important to know.
It is important to know, and maybe I should have thrown out a spoiler alert before you got into that. Anyway, I'm just joking. We're going to talk about that public bank in just a sec, but ballot initiatives are, a lot of states have them. A lot of states don't. Some states have very strong ballot initiatives, some states weaker. But the point here is that many states should consider pursuing ballot initiatives because with, at least in Washington, I can say, we don't have to worry about a filibuster or a parliamentarian or a veto. They're very powerful. So it provides us a means of passing this. And I have a new slide that I didn't quite get into this one, my mistake, but 6 states were able to expand Medicaid against the wishes of their governor through the ballot. So in terms of, again, providing that historical context of what has gotten people health care, ballot initiatives were really effective in terms of expanding Medicaid, especially in situations where the governor did not want to. And so that kind of brings us back to our, trying to think of this as big picture, right? So trying to think of the sort of local coalitions that could form around this. And I think that when I get to this slide, I'm usually trying to answer 2 main questions, right? How are you going to pass it? And how are you going to pay for it? And so up top, I have progressive taxation and public banking. We mentioned that, but North Dakota is that state with that public bank, and that provides a means to raise funds for something like a state, healthcare plan without even using taxation, or at least some funds without taxation, right? So you can raise money through investment. And so I think that's really important. But as you say, they can also finance these things through loans. And it's true that you can get a loan from any bank, but the difference between a public bank, right, is a public bank is a lot more interested in giving a low interest loan to a public infrastructure project. And then that money can stay in that state and fund that infrastructure rather than paying interest out to a Wall Street bank. So it's a much better way to develop infrastructure. Progressive taxation is something like out here in Washington, we have a very challenging tax code, but our bill would actually make the tax code more progressive. And then small d democracy, which we sort of touched on with ballot initiatives, but you'll see that the unicameral in U, that is a nod to Nebraska's legislature, which is the only unicameral legislature in the country. And the history there is that was also passed with the ballot initiative. But the point here is that most states have 2 chambers of their legislature. And what that means is 2 veto points. And we've seen this pattern a million times where something will pass the House, but only because they know it will fail in the Senate. And so we, or in some cases, it maybe even passes the House and the Senate, but only because they know the governor is going to veto it. We just think that a unicameral legislature is more proportionally representative. It's more direct. It provides fewer veto points for something like Medicare for all. And so we think that basically the more direct economic power that we have as citizens and the more direct political power we have through small d democracy, the more likely we are to win. And so that's where Medicare for all everywhere sits, increasing our economic and political power in order to give ourselves healthcare, which of course puts our power on steroids because now we're healthy, now we're secure, and there's no telling what we can do after that. And so we've got a Slack, we've got an email, and you're all welcome to join us there, where we will be continuing to develop these strategies and build that 50-state coalition. But that basically gets at the core of, what we believe is possible if we can unite these many state campaigns into a national strategy where they support one another and share their knowledge and their resources.
Okay, thank you, Andre. That was great. Very, very fine presentation. Flowing. Okay, imagine.
Given it a few times.
I know you get it a few times, but getting better and better, like a fine wine as you go forward. So there are, of course, a couple of questions that strike me here. We are constantly getting harassed. The people who believe in through the states, fighting on all fronts, okay, are getting harassed by certain other people who point out that because the states are not currency sovereigns, or monetary sovereigns, they don't really have the capacity to deficit spend very much. And, you partially addressed that. And we've talked, of methods that can give them some more flexibility. But it's still the case that by and large, that the federal government, if it chooses to exercise it, would not have a fiscal sustainability problem, if it had, a national program. So what they're saying is that because that doesn't exist at the state level, single payer programs are bound to prove fiscally unsustainable, and therefore they're going to fail. And that's basically the point we hear over and over and over again. They keep on making the same points. They've been making these points. The critics have been making these same points but for a year. They used to believe, I think, that generally speaking, the MMT economists agreed with them. They no longer make such claims because some of the MMT economists, including some of our own MMT economists, have made it clear that uh, just because a nation state, okay, or a state inside of a nation isn't the currency sovereign, that does not mean that it would not be able to design and to implement a fiscally sustainable single payer program. And the examples of that are all over Europe, of course. So here we are. But how would you answer that particular program? What are the reasons to believe that, for example, the Washington state program would be highly fiscally sustainable?
Well, the first thing that I think is important to point out is, you know, who else is not a currency sovereign? Me, my family,
Right.
the local businesses that employ myself and others and provide healthcare. So passing state single payer does not put us in any kind of worse place. In fact, it's a huge shield for ordinary people who might not be able to defend or might not be able to meet their healthcare bills. You know, people who are worried about, you know, about the state's ability to finance this. I mean, worry about us. We can't finance this. And I would rather have the state take that on, right? Because the state has resources that we don't have, right?
Okay, so
Well,
you are
and
making the point that the states are a lot more fiscally sustainable than the individuals within the states.
They are.
sure, sure. And the states are going to save a boatload of money doing this way. A boatload. And I find it interesting that no matter how many times that is said, we still have this segment of the quote unquote left that are going, how are you going to pay for it? It is so upsetting to me that we can't even look ourselves in the mirror and realize that we've turned into our own worst enemies.
Yeah, and you know, on that point, it needs to be said that we know that we can pay for it because we already do. We pay
Right.
so much in healthcare.
For
We're just saying
lousy
that,
healthcare.
yeah, if we're going to pay it, we should get good healthcare.
Mhm.
So then, you know, the other point, like you said, we see these examples all throughout Europe. You know, Germany is not a fiscal sovereign, right?
Right.
But they've maintained their system for decades, right? I mean, they were
Mhm.
like one of the first.
Well,
Um,
actually, I think they've maintained their system since roughly, what was it, 1870, 1876,
they,
when
they were fiscally sovereign at that time, though. We should point that out. They have
Right.
not been since they adopted the euro.
yes.
But the point is, we've seen this many
But
times.
however, they weren't fiscally sovereign, okay, at that time because they were on the gold standard. So,
I see. Okay.
Right. There is. Let's yeah.
No, that's true. I mean, a lot of this stuff does. It's like gold standard redux. But
Mhm. Yeah, I know.
but anyway, but the point is that you know, if you look at, you know, I have a spreadsheet that I maintain that has all of the countries with universal healthcare systems and then their GDP and their GDP per capita, whether or not they are a fiat currency issuer or not. And the fact is, I could pull it up to be sure, but Washington State is among the highest GDP per capita of, if you were to compare it to just all the countries with universal healthcare, I believe that we are at least in the top 3 GDP per capita. And if you adjust for among fiat, like non-fiat, non-currency issuers, we might be number 1. And I know Luxembourg is one of the ones ahead of us, but anyway, the point is that Washington per person is very wealthy, and that is the right way to do this because healthcare is per person. Um, but basically, Washington State has the wealth to compete with any of these countries that has demonstrated that they can indeed maintain universal healthcare without being currency issuers. And then the last point that I often throw out, and this is like, I had a conversation on Twitter with Stephanie Kelton about this, and I think this was kind of where we began to see a bit of daylight between the perspectives. But you know, not being able to issue your currency is a challenge, for anything that you're trying to fund. But it takes an additional leap to say we would be better off than maintaining where we are, like if we take this on, somehow we'll be worse off, right? And so she was using the example of Greece as a country that has had a hard time maintaining high quality healthcare services. And it's incredibly tragic, but nobody here would argue that Greece would be better off with a private healthcare system like ours, right? It's like, okay, these people are having a hard time financing their healthcare system. Let's introduce a for-profit middleman that is going to skim off the top and price gouge and deny coverage. How is this improving anyone's situation? So the last point just is the incredible power of the United States federal government as both a fiat currency issuer and the issuer of the global reserve currency, and the fact that with single payer healthcare, we're always talking about economy of scale, right? So increasing that scale always helps. So we increase the scale to the entire United States. We cover everybody. We can issue the currency. That's why we still believe in national improved Medicare for all. That's why we're fighting for it, right? That's why we don't think this job is done until we have it. It's just that we see establishing it through our direct democracy process in Washington is both a step that gets a ton of people healthcare and provides that political path where we can prove, in the context of the United States, that this is economically viable, that it's politically viable, and to make it so much harder to ignore, right? It's harder to ignore because it's here and it's happening, right? And so we think that it's an incredibly powerful means of advancing Medicare for all as an issue to pass it here.
Okay, but some more questions about that still. There is the objection that everybody raises that, but since the states are going to have to pay for single payer health care through additional taxation, there's going to be a race to the bottom. Businesses are going to be leaving the state of Washington to go to other states.
No, they're not.
Because they would be able to save taxes.
I mean, businesses are often like, if you look at the expenses that a business has to pay, healthcare is usually number one. It's either going to be employee payroll or it's going to be healthcare. One way that businesses get around this is to just not offer it. So I don't really think that we can count those ones because they're not contributing to the healthcare of people. But the point is, businesses are not necessarily getting a bad deal here because our healthcare system is incredibly expensive and they are one of the people paying into it. They're generally not profiting off of it. So the resistance of businesses to single payer healthcare, I think, is very interesting because it is expensive and it does require them to expend administrative resources on, basically it turns them into these like mini health insurance administrators. So it's simpler for them, and it in some cases will be cheaper depending on the size of the business and the number of people and stuff like that. We have a lot of businesses that support us. If you go to wholewashington.org/sign, you can find places to sign the petition, places to pick it up. And a good number of those are businesses who are here with us to make this happen. And I just think that for a lot of businesses, the draw of I get to focus on my business and I don't have to worry about my employees. They have healthcare. They're going to be healthier. They're going to be happier. And I think it will be both pro-business and pro-worker.
I
Okay.
think that I just want to interject here. You've got a lot of businesses that are going to be making money off of the healthcare system. Those people aren't going to support you as a business. However, their employees will. That's one of the things that inevitably you're going to run into, right? However, the people who are small business owners and small cap businesses that aren't affiliated or making money off of the healthcare industry as it is right now, they can't lose on this. They can't. It would be a huge win for them. Now, there is going to be some trepidation on the part of businesses because you're looking now at a population who is going to be more transient in their employment because they're not going to have that job that they don't necessarily want to be working at. Okay. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to want a job. It just means that things are going to change. And that is some of the resistance that you're going to get. Now, the companies that are going to pay more money, they can afford to. Right? I mean, that's the other piece of this puzzle. I don't think that anybody on the left or the right is going to argue the fact that large businesses have been making money hand over fist of late, unless they've, not all of them, but the big ones, they will. And the big businesses that are headquartered in Washington, they can afford to buck up a little bit on this. The truth of the matter is, small businesses, entrepreneurs, small cap businesses are going to save so much money, so much aggravation, so much time, energy, and effort and angst because nobody understands the plans that they're bringing in. No, you can't understand them until you have to go to the hospital. And it depends on what hospital you're going to, right? I mean, we all know this story. So
So let's
you
get
can't lose there.
but so let's get into some of the specifics here. Washington State is fairly low in terms of the average healthcare costs, okay, for businesses. Its costs in Washington is something like 17.5% to 18%, okay, of salary for those businesses that do pay for health insurance, okay, for their employees. Many other states, it's much higher than that. In Massachusetts, 21 or 22%, something like that. In California, 22 to 23%, okay, is the average. So Washington has a fairly low average at the 17 to 18%. However, the financial plans, okay, for Washington, okay, for whole Washington, uh, will cause businesses to pay taxes. Okay, the employee is 8.5%, and the business itself, I guess,
Employees 2% at most.
Okay.
Employees.
Okay, I guess I got that wrong. The 8.5%, okay, must be the employer share. Okay, but the point being that they get to pay then 8.5% for their share, or perhaps 10.5%. I've seen that figure too because of variation.
I can
Okay.
explain that. It's a little bit confusing.
Okay, but prior to your explaining it, I just want to make the main point, which is having to pay 8.5% or 10.5% is a really good deal when you've been paying 17%. So for the large businesses that provide health care for their employees, they are going to save a ton from the single payer program. So why should they move out from Washington and move into a state that's going to stick them with perhaps not even the 17 to 18%, but the 20 to 21% to 23% that obtains in some of the other states? In fact, there's no financial incentive for businesses to move away from Washington, okay, and to move into other states just because the single payer program was adopted in Washington.
Yeah. So first, to clarify the 10.5 versus 8.5, the way that works is that the employer is on for 10.5%. Now, they can deduct up to 2% of that from employee payroll. So
Right.
employees will pay 0 to 2%. They can choose to cover that as an employment benefit, and that's something that they may choose to continue to do. We will have to see, but you're right that either way, it's looking pretty good for most businesses.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrific trade-off.
It is. It's huge. It's
and
huge.
then, I think that there's a lot of things, there's this idea that businesses are, it's a classic fallacy, right? The rational economic actor that businesses supposedly are, right? And across a number of things, whether it is, say, a higher wage, which they often see a higher wage as, well, this just costs us money, right? But they don't think about things like, well, we raise the wage, we have less turnover, we don't have to
Right.
spend as much on retraining, right? We don't have to spend as much on employee retention. And actually, we come out a little bit ahead. Another one, right? The 4-day work week. We have been completely, normalized to the 5-day, 40-hour work week. And you would basically, the way that this has been treated is 40 hours is 40 hours of work. If we could have 45, then we'd have 5 more hours of work, right? If we went down to 32, we'd have 8 less. But when actual pilots have been run to see what happens if we change to a 4-day work week, what do they find? Happier employees, more productive employees, no loss in bottom
Productivity.
line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, productivity is higher and profitability is the same or higher, right? And so just because businesses oppose something does not mean it's because it's bad for business. And in this case, businesses, I think you're right. Businesses have enjoyed having a captive workforce that has to work here or risk losing their healthcare. But
For
you know
very
what?
little money.
For very little money. But we're going to change this system, and then people will be able to work where they want. And you know what they might find? Happier employees, better employees, more productive employees, less money spent administering healthcare. Like, I think that this is something, I think that that healthcare is so incredibly important and so connected to everything that we cannot even calculate the benefits that will be had, right? Because we start to talk about things like the entrepreneur who was able to start a business they never would have been able to start because they were able to keep their health care, or people being able to pursue their education further because they weren't worried about their health care, people who accomplished more in their life because they lived longer, right? This is actually one of the places where I think we can really see some daylight. By the way, when we say the MMT community doesn't really have beef with us, it's really very small parts of it. But one of the things that they talk about in the deficit myth and other parts of MMT discourse is the idea of like real productivity, real resources. I can't remember, they maybe sometimes use a couple different terms, right? But what we're doing is we're making a huge investment in our human resources. We're going to make ourselves stronger, healthier, happier. And that is going to make us just a wealthier and better people. Like, we are all going to be better off for it.
Going to increase the productivity of the workforce as well. And so that's a benefit. Okay. And so I think we can come down to a summary point and say that if what we're saying here is correct, then Washington is not going to represent a race to the bottom.
Far from it.
It's going to be a race to the top. It's going to be a model state that is going to become even more attractive to people outside of the state, and it's going to increase a positive pressure, on other states to also pass a single payer. So the way I usually answer the race to the bottom, people say, no, it's going to be a race to the top. Okay, you're simply mistaken about the motivating factors here. But the opponents would still come back, I think, with one more point. And that point, I think would be, well, look, let's take, a state like Washington. I mean, right now it's spending close to $100 billion for healthcare under the present system. Okay, and if we suddenly put this into a single payer in Washington, where would it find $100 billion in taxes that it would have to find? So, how would you answer that, Andre?
Well, first, I just want to take a sec to talk about that whole race to the bottom bit. I think that this will create a race to the top because it raises people's expectation. I think once people have health care, they don't want to give it up. And I think that once people have the idea that they deserve health care, that is a very powerful idea that will spread.
Yes,
I don't know how familiar you are with David Dole. He has a YouTube show called The Rational National. He's
yes,
a Canadian.
I am familiar with him. I
Mhm.
watch him fairly frequently, in fact.
Okay, well, he once was talking about the Canadian healthcare system, which is a fantastic healthcare system, but does not include dental, vision, hearing as part of its basic Medicare plan. And he talked about how if Medicare for all were to pass in the United States, that Canada would not be content being second best,
Yeah,
because
it would
they
pass.
consider the healthcare system a matter of national pride. And so if Medicare for all were to pass in the United States, and if it were to include dental, vision, hearing, then there would be pressure in Canada for them to add those benefits to their healthcare system. And I think that will, I want to make sure people understand we're talking about full coverage, no copays, no premiums, no deductibles for everything, including dental, vision, hearing, prescription drug, reproductive care, mental health, gender affirming care. We're covering non-citizens. So we're actually saying that we are going to establish the most comprehensive and generous and fair healthcare system in the world. And that is going to create a race to the top, not just in the United States, but worldwide.
Mm.
Okay. So with that,
Okay, great.
the
So move
taxes.
on to how is Washington going to handle $100 billion in taxes that will cost the state, these people say, if they switch to a single payer healthcare system?
Mm-hmm. And the first part of it is that we don't need to pay as much for our plan as we are already paying, right? So we've already kind of touched this, but if the current plan, I don't remember 100 billion, I usually say 80 billion, but depending on which economic analysis you look at, and two have been run by Dr. Gerald Friedman.
Right.
One has been
I
run.
was looking, at Jerry Friedman's analysis.
Okay, yeah, maybe I need to take another look at the more recent one. That's the other thing to keep in mind, right? Is like when you talk about businesses moving to other states, right? Well, in Washington, we're going to fix the healthcare problem, but in other states, they're going to still have the ballooning costs of healthcare. So, however much they're paying now, it's higher next year, and it's higher next year, and it's higher next year. And healthcare costs I think they will continue to rise in Washington as well. Inflation and everything else that leads to that. But it's going to actually address the causes of healthcare inflation and get it more under control. And by the way, this doesn't have to end at whole Washington or single payer either. Like sometimes people who believe in more socialized healthcare systems say, well, single payer is great, but don't we need public hospitals and stuff? And I say to them, we have public hospitals, right? Through the UW medical system, which is where I get most of my health care. And it's actually the only place that covers my dental care because I'm on Medicaid. But that's a system of public hospitals. Now, in our current system, a public hospital is not necessarily that different from a private hospital. But with whole Washington, you then have a public hospital with public financing. And you can start to see some of these savings. So one thing to keep in mind, right, that I think is really interesting is once you have the state who has taken on the financial responsibility of healthcare, you then begin to create incentives to reduce the cost of healthcare by, say, taking on environmental healthcare, right? If the state's saying, like, look, all of these emissions are causing us to have to pay for people's healthcare, let's invest in our public transit, get that a little bit more under control, right? So creating that incentive to actually address the health economics, I think, is really powerful. But if you want to know how we're going to pay for it, I mean, this is all on Whole Washington's website. If you go to the website, there's an information tab at the top, including a how we pay for it. But yeah, we've already pretty much mentioned the most important ones, right? So we have the 10.5 employer tax. 2% of that can be deducted from employee payroll. If you are a sole proprietor, then you also are on for 2%. And then the last bit is an 8.5% tax on capital gains. By the way, all of these have exemptions for people who have, the lowest income. So with capital gains, for instance, the first $15,000 of capital gains are completely exempt. Home sales are exempt. Retirement accounts are exempt. And 90% of Washington, when you take these exemptions into account, is making less than $10,000 a year on capital gains. So really, it is intended to hit the people with the most,
the ones who can afford it.
The ones who can afford it, the highest wealth, the highest incomes. And then the last bit that I think is just often gets missed is that a non-trivial amount of this funding comes from federal money.
67% of it. Joe and I went through this on several occasions. 67% of the funding that this plan is going to need is going to come from federal dollars.
Right. So let me be a little more explicit about that. The figure isn't really $100 billion. It was something like $97.5 billion. So it's very close, to $100 billion. But the calculation by Jerry Friedman was that $97.5 billion, when we enter the single payer program, would go down to something like $67.4 billion due to the savings.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really $67.4 billion that has to be financed, not the $97 billion. Then, taking into account the revenue sources that he lists, the various ones, with the most important ones, of course, being the revenue sources for Medicaid, and Medicare, from the federal government, we would be looking at another close to 47 billion, something like $46.9 billion that would be covered from the federal, and other sources. So that would leave for the state to fund only about $20.5 billion, in the first year. And the revenue plan would actually produce a surplus, something like $32.5 billion. So not only was the $20.5 billion covered, but there would be a surplus in the first year of $12.2 billion. Now, those surpluses are quite important because they grow, with each year. So by the second year, the accumulated surplus would be something like 25 billion or 26 billion. By the third year, it would be something like 37 billion, or 38 billion. Why is this important? Well, let's say there was a disaster in the economy of Washington and the GDP of Washington fell by something like 15 to 20% because there was a deep depression, in 1 year. So the payroll taxes collected in that situation would be less. So let's say they went down by 15 to 20%. Well, if they went down to 15 to 20% because of the surpluses, that would easily be covered. In other words, they could easily cover a $5 billion shortfall in a particular year, or a $10 billion shortfall. And the great accumulated surpluses after 3 years would largely remain, even if there was a deficit, of $5 billion to $10 billion. So that shows you how fiscally sustainable this particular program is.
And then it's not even.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Joe. It does not even take into account the actual savings that are going to come, because now people have health care, right? And no one, and I've said this over and over again, no one truly understands how much money is in circulation, how many kickbacks are out there, how much incentive is out there. coming off of all the money that we pay into healthcare that will go away because you've now got a single payer plan that is operated and owned by the state itself and its people. Okay. So there's all kinds of things that people can throw at you about, oh, it's going to put a lag on the system because now you've covered everybody. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So we shouldn't do it? Of course you have to do it. And with that kind of a surplus, Washington's plan, I believe in lock, stock, and barrel, because you're going to have enough surplus to be able to take a look at where your shortcomings are, where you don't have enough brick and mortar facilities, where you need human resources and you've got to do a hiring. You're going to have that money in there, still able to handle the inflation and the recessionary outcome of what's coming right now. You're going to be able to handle that, because let's not forget, inflation is a lagging indicator, and you're going to have plenty of time to build up that surplus to stuff that hole. You've got the greatest, I mean, in my wildest dreams, I would not have foreseen the kind of surpluses that you're going to build up. Now, you're going to need them because there are going to be unforeseen things that are going to have to be taken care of. But I still think you've got plenty of buffer to do this the right way.
Yeah, and that's entirely intentional. It's a part of the design, is to account for these kinds of possibilities.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add, because people bring all sorts of concerns, right? What if at some point in the future you're having difficulty paying for this, or well, okay, so sorry, I wanted to make one point. I think that Dr. Friedman's analysis is very good, and it calculates all sorts of savings. One of the savings that I was a little surprised to not see, I believe, I mean, I could take another look, but my recollection is that it does not spend a lot of time calculating savings through preventative care. And I think that
yes, I didn't see that either. Yeah.
But he can't project that. He's an economist. He's not a healthcare provider. So he was being conservative. And I think he was being unbelievably conservative, because I worked in healthcare. And I can tell you, after 10 years, just providing preventative care for your patients, for your employees, taking the stress level off of what potential healthcare costs do to people. Stress makes people sick, causes mental illness, ruins families, right? We know inherently that there is an incredible amount of savings just from providing people with the stress relief of not having to worry about, oh my God, if my kid gets sick or breaks his arm, am I going to be able to afford it? Right? So Jerry did exactly what he was supposed to do, and the numbers still shocked me. I couldn't believe it, because I know that those numbers, the realization of what you're actually going to be able to do with that, are going to be, it's dumbfounding what you might be able to do with the money that's going to be in there after you fix the entire healthcare system, and you're going to need to. Then you're going to put your public health structure together. When you have a single payer healthcare system, what you're also going to have automatically is a public health infrastructure, right? Because you can't help it. You're not competing with the insurance healthcare delivery systems who refuse to do things like vaccinate people, right? Where you've got to now rely on the federal government, and you've got to go through all those kinds of fights. You will have that infrastructure in place to do it.
Absolutely, and I think that I think you're right that a lot of the projections are incredibly conservative. But the thing on top of it, right, is like, yes, I believe it saves a lot of money. I believe it makes our lives better in so many different ways. But if you told me that actually the truth of the matter is it's going to cost 10 billion more, right? Like, sometimes people are like, well, it's going to cost more because people who can't go to the doctor right now are going to start going to the doctor. Well, they should go to the doctor, and
yes,
we should find a way to pay for that, and if the courts have a problem with this, then we will take on the courts. And if in the future we're having trouble paying for this, then we will need to find a way to pay for it. If we still don't have NEMA, right? Which I hope we have, any day, right? I hope it happens before the midterms, right. Who am I to say, right? But I mean, frankly, right, I make this point all the time. I would love for them to pass this through the legislature, pass NEMA. I could get my life back. um, but the point is just that um, this is a matter of deciding first, like that your priority is healthcare, and that we are going to find a way to get people the healthcare that they need. And of course, we can pay for it. And if we pay for it one way and that stops working, then we need to just find another way to pay for that. But it is not better to just leave people out there without healthcare. We can't do that.
Yeah, I can't believe that people actually say things like that. I mean, so Washington can't cover everybody in their state because we've all got to sit around and wait until everybody gets it. We all know that we're light years away from that. We know that.
I mean, I personally make a point to not say that. I don't know. I think that change happens really slowly and then it happens really quickly, and it can be surprising. We don't always know, but I do know that we don't need to wait. And waiting, there is no virtue in waiting. It doesn't get us anywhere.
Well,
so I think,
and really, this is really poignant to me. It is much more advantageous for the states to do things like, if you have an expanded Medicaid, fight for that, right? Because it's going to cover your population and start getting them care, as opposed to not having that care. And then when it comes, right, let's just say that the national comes, you're lacking infrastructure. You've got more sick people now that are going to demand care. It's like prep for a marathon. You've got to get that infrastructure in place. And once you get universal health care, if you don't have that medical infrastructure in place and you've got really sick people because of it, yes, you are going to have a heck of a lag on your system because you haven't done anything about it. And that doesn't mean that every state's going to. We've got those states where the governance in the state could care less if they cover people. As a matter of fact, it behooves them not to in their minds, right? I'm glad I don't live there. I don't want to ever live in a state like that, but we know that they exist.
Yeah, like Texas.
And even the southern states that haven't expanded Medicaid at all, okay? They are at a disadvantage. They're also at a disadvantage because they're not organized around healthcare in the state. If we could get what's going on in Washington state to happen in every state, where you've got an on-the-ground movement where you're socializing the concept of single-payer healthcare in your state, imagine then there would be no way, if all the states were working diligently at establishing a single payer within their state, the demand for it would be we'd get the other 30% on board.
Yes,
Even the conservatives want a $12 billion surplus in their state, for goodness sakes, right? Now we're just looking at the true duploy here, right? I'm going to cut off my nose to spite my own face, and my constituents for that matter, right? There's no good reason not to do this.
I sometimes have to field the challenge of, isn't this incrementalism, right? And I personally don't think of it in that way. But to me, it's like, okay, let's talk about incrementalism for just a second, right? Because we're here and we need national improved Medicare for all. And when I start to say, okay, so what should we do, right? What is the plan if you're a critic of state single payer? And I was quite surprised to hear that some of these people who, will be screaming that state single payer is incrementalism, and then when you ask what their approach is, they say, well, we should pass non-binding resolutions for Medicare for all at city councils, and if you get a lot of them, then maybe at the state level, and we should call our legislators and ask them to co-sponsor it. And then maybe, some of the ones that have a little bit more of a revolutionary mindset will say, well, we should do die-ins. We should demonstrate outside their houses or on the steps of Congress. And what I say is, all of these things are great. We've actually done most of these things. But they also get exactly zero people health care. So they are incremental steps towards national improved Medicare for all that we support and we do. It's just that our favorite form of steps towards Medicare for all are the ones that get people health care. Medicaid
Right.
expansion gets a lot of people health care, so we support that, despite how limited it actually is. State single payer is way better,
Mm-hmm.
way better
Yes.
than Medicaid expansion. So of course we support it. It's a much bigger step.
Right.
Right.
And state level also, to me, is much better as a motivator for the movement than the various things that they would like to do. In other words, to have a resolution from a city council, or from a state legislature, that's nice. But
It
as you
is
said,
nice.
it doesn't get people care.
No, and it doesn't guarantee that they're going to vote
Yeah.
for it when
And-
it really needs to happen.
Right.
And
So it's not as motivating as getting care from
Right.
states
it
and
could
having the fact that there's care in that other state, that you can see it and you can see it works and you can
Right.
see it helps people. That is really motivating, because you say to yourself, we can get that in our state if they got
Right.
it.
I mean,
Right.
I want to talk just for a sec about burnout, because it's so common that people burn out of activism. And when I think about why, it's because people put in a ton of work, right? Activism not easy. So
Mhm.
you spend time sitting in meetings, you spend time out on the streets, you make phone calls. What keeps people in activism is the sense that their work is doing something of value.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people who might run these resolutions, I'm proud of them. I hope they're proud of them. I hope it makes them feel energized to be a part of the movement. But I think that what it lacks is that sense of, I showed up, I took action, and then my life got better and the lives of my community got better. And I think that can burn people out, because they say, I did all this work, I passed the resolution, I thought something was going to happen, and then nothing, right? And I think that when people can see, you know what, it was a lot of work. I did have to stand out in the sun and collect a lot of signatures, right? And I didn't always enjoy it, but in the end, I got healthcare, and everyone that I is in my community got healthcare. It
And
shows people that it's worth it.
saved lives.
Saved lives.
I
I have more money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So real things happened, and that is reinforcing to a movement and motivating for a movement. It is not as reinforcing to a movement to have occasional successes at the local level and the state level in terms of getting a resolution, which is kind of a transition to something else, that I wanted to talk about, as maybe the final thing, that we'll talk about. For Medicare for all, everywhere, you introduced in the retreat, a couple of weeks ago, the idea of swarm organizing. You showed a video, about that. What do you see the role of swarm organizing to be in spreading Medicare for all everywhere?
Yeah, so just to give people a little bit of context on Swarm, Swarm is an organizing model that, in the video I showed, was being presented by one of the founders of the Swedish Pirate Party, and basically the way that he frames it is, how do we achieve something that seems impossible, or a huge kind of goal, um, at a much smaller amount of money, but by mobilizing a huge number of people. And that's basically, sets up the situation that we're in, right? We'll never have the money of the medical industrial complex. They will use that to fight us. And we're not going to beat them by raising more money and defeating them in that way. So, what do we have? We have people. So, how do we use people to achieve something that normally would cost a ton of money, by coordinating them? And there's a lot to it. And in the video that I showed, um, which I think might be called Organizing the Swarm. I encourage folks to watch it. It's very interesting. But I would say that they present a very, I don't want to use the word extreme, but it's really taking this to its full conclusion, right? Which is like, he said, if 3 members of the organization agree on an action, including the expenditure of resources, they approve it. And so the idea of it, I think, generally speaking, is what you do is you remove barriers, right? So there are a lot of barriers when you say get a job and there's things that you want to do, but it's like, oh, you got to ask the boss, you got to get that spending approved, you got to work through all of these processes. And, if it's your job, maybe you do it. But if we're talking about volunteers, asking them to jump through 50 hoops to get something done is another one of those things that's going to contribute to burnout. So how do we create an organization that instead of makes people feel like I joined this organization and the first thing they asked me to do is a bunch of work, as opposed to I joined this organization and it immediately empowered me to do things that I want to do and wouldn't have been able to do if I wasn't part of this organization, right? So how do we empower individuals to take the action that they want to take, that they were already hoping to take, with as few barriers as possible, and to be more successful than they would have if they just pursued it on their own? So I think that if you kind of take it at that level of principles, there are any number of ways that this can apply to an organization, right? So, I'll just give one example, right? This is one that came up in a discussion at Seattle DSA, right? But they require, in order to vote on matters of business, right, that you have to attend our membership meetings. They're on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. And if you're not in attendance at that meeting, then you won't be sent a ballot and you're not supposed to vote. And, people have suggested in the past, why don't we have an absentee system? And then the response is, people who like it the way it is tend to say, well, it's because we want to encourage debate and discourse, right? We want people to discuss these things. And I can respect that, except that you can't make people discuss things that, and
if they don't
people don't want to be at a meeting. I personally, in order to attend these meetings, have to take time off of work because I work Tuesday evenings, right? And so that might be okay in an organization of 50 people, right? But if you're talking about organizing 10,000 people, which is the kind of numbers we might need to see in order to make Medicare for all happen, for instance, right? Well, I don't know that that's going to scale, right? So always trying to reframe things in terms of what people can do rather than what they can't. You can attend a meeting and you can participate in discourse, but the way it's currently set up is that, well, you can't vote unless you do that thing, right? But what if instead it's you can vote because you're a member of this organization and you can participate in the discourse if you so choose. And by the way, you can participate in the discourse on Slack. You can participate it on Twitter, right? It doesn't have to be at that meeting at that time, right? And so I just think that any organizer should always be thinking, how do I empower the work of my volunteers? And how do I create things that they can do rather than things that they can't? And one of the really important aspects of this is the only way that this truly works, right, is you need to set up sort of like an epic moonshot goal that is enough to get people to be self-motivated, but is also clear. When you can give them that clear goal, we all can understand very clearly what we're trying to do, then that means that, it's okay if some of these things are not good ideas, right? It's okay if some people don't believe the same thing as other people. But the point is, everyone is now united behind this shared goal. And so you kind of have to put that trust into people that they are.
The shared goal is a tangible goal.
It's a tangible goal. And that it means that if people, if enough people are doing enough of the right things, enough of the time, that will actually get you there faster than saying, well, we need a perfect plan, perfectly executed by the right people, and that plan's going to come down from the top. It turns out that, like, one, the only way to get people to work under those conditions is to pay them, right? So that's why it costs so much money, is that people don't want to do your plan. So you have to pay them to do something they don't want to do. Now you're staffed by a bunch of people who don't want to do the thing that you're trying to make them do. Instead, you say, I'm doing this. It's worth doing. It's awesome. If you want to come along with me, then
Great.
we welcome your contributions.
So you plan on using these kinds of organizing principles for Medicare for All?
I don't just plan to, I do them every day at Whole Washington. We're doing them at Medicare for All everywhere. And even at orgs that are less amenable to it, there are still always ways where you can, in small ways, empower people a little bit, change an organization a little bit, and that's the thing, is that it starts with you, right? It starts with you saying, I'm doing this, right? And I welcome people to come with me, right? And if you want to join me, right, then I will support you. You'll support me, and we'll get farther, right? So you can do that within pretty much any organization. There might be some where it's actually impossible, but I think that even in very top-down organizations, if you can find even just a little bit of autonomy, then you can take steps in this direction. But I think that a lot of the times it's not even that organizations are opposed to this. It's just that it's a little bit foreign to them, because most of our frame of reference comes from the workplace, which is very top down.
Top down.
Yeah. So I think even just bringing it into a space for a conversation about it, it begins to plant those seeds in people's minds. Like, how can we, remove some of the, bureaucracy? How can we streamline some of our processes, bring more people in, give everyone something to do? And I think that generally speaking, the reception to it is very positive.
In swarm organizing, I think one of the key points is that they give themselves something to do. It's not so much the organization gives them something to do. They come in, okay, and they're committed to the goal. And then some subset of the people who come in define their own jobs.
Yeah, things that, you would have never thought of, right? Leadership would have never thought of. And it's because that's the idea, right? 10,000 brains working on this, right? There are things that would not work, if you weren't fully bringing in that many people and giving them the space and the tools and the permission to really use their ideas and their talents towards the goal, right? So it's about recognizing the value that anyone and everyone can bring to a campaign.
Yes. Yeah, complex adaptive systems theory. Okay, I guess that kind of does it for me. We can take a look at the comments.
Yeah, I'd love to hang out with the chat for a bit. I saw some interesting ones. I don't know if I'll be able to find it again.
Okay, well, we'll just go through them here. And we'll see. Wow. We have all kinds of friends here tonight. Okay, let's see. Robert Copeland says, I know at least 5 organizations that support CalCare here in California. I'm sure that there are other organizations. Someone asked you, how does Andre feel about a Washington, Oregon, California coalition for border-to-border West Coast, M for All? That was from Stephen Wolfbrand.
I think if Stephen's been on the call, it'll be pretty clear that I'm all about that. I would find that incredibly exciting, and I'm actively working to build that.
Yes, I would find that incredibly exciting too. I kind of envisioned some time ago that would even go beyond those 3 states, because it would serve as a magnet for other states. and that it wouldn't be too long before they were joined by Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona, okay, and also Nevada.
And, one thing I didn't bring into this is I don't even think it's out of the question that they would need to have one to join, if that makes sense. I think that 2 or 3 states might look at it and say, hey, this would be too difficult for us to do on our own, but we will just do it together, right? And so I think even from the outset, it could be a regional healthcare plan.
Yes, I think that's a possible thing that they could do, and it would give everybody more confidence. But I really have this belief that the way the economics of this works, that the smallest state inside of the United States and the poorest state could still benefit from a single payer program. I know that's a difficult argument perhaps to make. Someday I'd like to have a debate with people from the other side talking about the economics of the situation in some of the poorest states and showing that the numbers still work out, that it would still be an economic benefit for the state. It would still create a race to the top, instead of a race to the bottom. It's just because of the way the numbers work out. The current system is so expensive, just so expensive, and so much waste, okay, in the current system. And the way of financing healthcare that's outlined by Friedman, with the great federal component coming in and with the relatively small state component that can be mostly financed by payroll taxes, which exist in every state, okay, all across the country. Everybody's got to pay the payroll taxes anyway. So, it's sort of like a nice bridge hand, even in the smallest state. Everything makes, it just comes together. Anyway, Steve Wolfbrand said, parliamentarian, why not just blame it on the janitor? Why not?
Appreciate it.
Jesus thinks California needs to team up with Oregon and Washington and create a healthcare system.
Glad that idea is catching on. I was really surprised to hear, by the way, on a national call with labor that Pramila Jayapal's staff put on. And somebody asked about state healthcare, and Pramila actually said, it's a little bit challenging at state level, but we think it's possible. We think that people are doing good work. And by the way, zooming out to regional level makes this even more possible. And I was quite surprised to see her be the one to suggest that, because we had been working on that for a couple months in Medicare for All Everywhere, and we had never had any indication that Pramila's people had even thought about that. But I think that idea is increasingly out there.
I think it is too. Let's see if we find some others. There's a discussion of how to manage the water in various regions of the country.
Interesting. Surely I need another issue to
motivate you, right?
I don't think that, if we were to get this ground movement, this groundswell in healthcare, and we did it in a way that we started working with other states at the same time, the idea of that, what do I want to say? Just the camaraderie of it, but also the knowing that you're not alone, knowing that you're not just fighting, it's not just your state against your internal state legislature. You've got another state, and the people are piggybacked on one another. That's really powerful. It's easy for a legislature to fight its own constituents, but when you start pulling in people working with you from other states, that's a whole new ballgame. Because that's telling the politicians now they're done with us. They're starting to organize themselves even outside of the state. That's pretty powerful.
Outside of the state, outside of the candidates, outside of the
Mhm.
parties. I think showing ourselves as healthcare, like healthcare as our primary political motivation beyond any loyalty that we have to politicians or parties
Right.
is what starts to show we're building our own power. We're not asking. We are
Right.
going to build the power to get this done. You're welcome to join us, but we're actually not asking you to lead this.
That's key right now. That's
And
critical for what we're
that is
doing.
very powerful. So
Mhm.
powerful. When you start to leave them behind, then they
Catch
start
up.
getting concerned. Yeah, they love to lead from behind. So if you can get them to lead from behind, it's all right.
I see one that just came in at the end here. What does Andre think of the Minnesota health program? And I have to say, I don't know a ton about that. I would love to get folks who know more about that into Medicare for All everywhere. We do really want to have people from every state to help us learn these things. That's how we're going to build out this knowledge base and this, this coalition to be in this strategy. So I'm fairly certain I've seen some pretty good sort of single payer organizations in Minnesota. I haven't met any of those organizers yet, though. So if you know anyone, please feel free to set up an introduction. Feel free to drop in on our meeting. Medicare for All Everywhere meets on Mondays right now at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. We have other avenues that you can get in touch with us if that time doesn't work with you. But yeah, we would need people from every state. So if there's anyone out there from Minnesota or any other state that wants to take some initiative for developing this campaign in their state, we would love to have you.
So Jeffrey Denton raised the point that the only time a state-based system wouldn't be fiscally self-sustaining is that the beginning and during the transition and retraining phase of the process. Okay, in my opinion.
Just depends on how much money you've got coming in and what kind of transition you need to do. I mean, the other thing about Washington State is it doesn't have an insurance conglomerate giant sitting in it, controlling it, right? Which makes it an easier lift from a lot of perspectives, right? And it's a perfect sandbox, if you will, for proof. You've got a large demographic or a large logistical demographic, and yet you've got just under 8 million people there. Maybe it's 7.2. I get it confused with Massachusetts. One 7.6 million, the other one 7.2. I think Washington's 7.2. Either way, it doesn't matter.
I think Washington has more than Massachusetts now.
I've been saying
Okay.
7.5.
Okay. So, I mean, it's a great place to do a proof. Massachusetts healthcare is incredibly expensive because they've got a heck of a lot of innovative healthcare there, right? So their per capita healthcare costs are more expensive than Washington's. Washington state itself has some great healthcare, but they don't have the massive population to deal with. It's a great place to do this and do it well and document that blueprint that needs to happen on how to replicate it.
So I'm gonna just throw it out here now. We're at 7:55. It's been a long conversation, been a great conversation. I'm happy to stay on till 8. So if folks want to squeeze in a question or something, now would be the great time. And then I'd love to just wrap it up with a few calls to action and links and stuff that I want people to be aware of.
Okay, that sounds like a good program to me, Andre. So go right ahead.
Okay, folks. So, as I've been saying on a lot of meetings and podcasts and stuff, I always say that we want to create a universal campaign for universal healthcare, which means that all of you out there ought to be able to get involved. And obviously, if you're in Washington State, we need as many signature gatherers as we can get. So, go to wholewashington.org. That's the place to start. If you want to volunteer, wholewashington.org/volunteer. If you want to sign, wholewashington.org/sign, which is also the place where you can figure out where you can pick up a petition sheet to start gathering signatures. You'll see a map. And then just a few other things that I want folks to know about. There was I don't know what counts as viral these days, but you might have seen this poster design out there on Twitter. It got a retweet by Nina Turner. This is designed to be home printed. So you can go to wholewashington.org/print and find a lot of stuff that you can home print. I think we're going to have a button design in there pretty soon. If you happen to have a button press, we have our digital toolkit with high res logos and stuff like that. So you can go there to see, if there's anything that you want to get started on in terms of, printing some quarter sheets or something. But even if you're not in Washington State, if you can make it out here, you're welcome to gather signatures with us. If you can't make it out here, we still have lots to do on social media. We have data entry. We have any number of things, coalition building. So, please go to wholewashington.org/volunteer, no matter where you are. Take that first step. Just dip your toes into the campaign. It's been really an incredible experience for me to get to work on this because I've had a number of jobs. I've worked across a couple sectors. I've been in startups, nonprofits, giant corporations. And I've never felt so in community with people. I've never felt so empowered to take the action that I want to take. And then the last thing, I have to do it. I'm still getting used to being in politics sometimes, but please, wholewashington.org/donate. These campaigns, honestly, this campaign is on the cheap, I would say. Sometimes people say ballot initiatives are expensive. They're a little expensive if you get them on the ballot, but we're still getting on the ballot, and that is actually more affordable than you think. But we do need donations. So if folks go to wholewashington.org/donate, your contributions make an incredible impact on the campaign. I'll just throw out, we just printed another batch of 10,000 petition sheets. And we believe that this is probably going to be our last batch because I think that the number of sheets that we got out there is enough for 450,000 signatures. So 400,000 was already more than we needed. 450,000 was 50,000 more than our goal. So with this, printing, we're going to really have our resources, accounted for. We're going to be getting them distributed out to everyone. We've already done a pretty good job on distribution, but we'll make sure we hit every corner of the state. But what that means is that, for a long time, the main thing that our donations have been focused on is like, okay, we need to make sure we have enough money to print because if we're caught without the money to print the petition sheets, then we're just dead in the water. Right. Now we can start to do things that are more robustly focused on getting signatures. So everything from high quality campaign literature, video production, advertising, possibly paid canvassers or paid staffers. I throw out every once in a while. I am not a paid staffer, but it would be nice to be one. So if you support the work of Whole Washington, if you like what we're doing out here, this is my favorite work to donate to. I've donated to Bernie. I've donated to a ton of political causes, but this one really, that donation gets out there, and it really, even when we don't make it, it still means that it helped us have this conversation with thousands of people and bring a ton of new volunteers into this campaign for healthcare justice. So I want people to know that your work at Whole Washington and your donations to Whole Washington are never, ever wasted. They always get us closer to this goal, and we are going to get there.
Okay, thank you, Andre. That was a wonderful presentation, very well rounded. I think we hit almost all the major issues that I can think of. And we did it in 2 hours, so that was very, very good.
Well, thank you both so much. Yeah, y'all stay on topic. I mean, this was all substance. So thank you again for having me. I'm making the podcast
That's a
circuit.
compliment. That's a big compliment coming from you.
To a podcaster? Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Yeah, it's not always my experience when I go on shows. So I appreciate it so much, but I am out there trying to get word out there to the whole movement. You know, I mean, we're out here in Washington, but I mean, this, as again, repercussions across the country and the world. And I think that if the movement can see the opportunity that we have here, and if the national movement can bring themselves to jumping on this and kind of jumping in with both feet and not just, you know, supporting it, but like supporting it from their heart, you know.
Right.
I think that is what is going to really make this happen. That's how we will defeat big pharma and private health insurance. It's going to take all of us. So please find any way you can at all to contribute to the campaign, even if it's just, say, hitting a like on this video or hitting retweet. It helps us get the word out there. And if any of you happen to run a YouTube show or podcast, I will absolutely 100% come on and talk your ear off about healthcare justice.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Are there any links that you would like to leave?
Oh, sure. I mean, I said most of them, but let me just, I'll just drop them in the chat real fast. Do I have the chat? I have the private chat. I'll drop them in the private chat and you can share them out. So we got wholewashington.org. We got wholewashington.org/volunteer. We got wholewashington.org/sign and donate. I mean, people don't need all of these, but the other one I'll share. Whole Washington is on Twitter, so you can find them there, but I'll share the link for Medicare for All everywhere. So you can follow them on Twitter if the national coalition has more appeal to you. You can follow me as well. I'm Captain Stack on Twitter, so I'll drop that one. And I would absolutely love to organize with you. So get in touch, and we'll find a way to get y'all involved.
It's good seeing you again, Andre. I haven't seen
Thank
you
you,
in a while.
Andre.
Thank you. Hope to be back.
That was wonderful.
Who knows when, but I do hope to be back. So thank you.
You can come
you'll
back
be back
anytime.
again.
All right.
Let us know if you want to get back on here, and we'll reach out.
Yeah, we'll facilitate it.
Awesome.
We'll
Have a
make-
great rest of your evening. In
You
solidarity,
too.
everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Lisa, that was very fast paced and very well done.
I can't believe it 2 hours have gone by.
Just
It was
like
good.
that, right?
It was good. It was really good. It was really, really
just
good.
like that when you're having fun.
Well, I think that now that I have stepped away from some of my other stuff, I should drop back into the Medicare for All everywhere and just keep up on that. I had to put it down because I had too many other things going on, but I don't have too many other things going on anymore.
Okay, for me, it's that 4 o'clock time on Monday.
Oh, is that when it is?
That's when it is. So it's, really kind of disastrous for me. If it were 1 o'clock on Monday, I could certainly make it.
4 o'clock's a tough time.
If
I
it
don't
were
know.
5 o'clock on Monday, I could certainly make it, but that 4 o'clock time isn't good for me.
It's only an hour though. I don't know. I guess I'm just gonna have to get back into it because it was really a good effort. And I just had too many other things going on, but those other things aren't going on as heavy as they used to be. So I'm gonna step back in and get back up to speed because I miss those guys.
Folks, it's time for us to end. I did want to say that we have dumped the incumbents tomorrow, and there are primaries to go over, and there are late results from California and late results from Texas to talk about. And we also have to talk about the state of the movement in a situation where people are getting beat up by big money.
Yeah.
And beat up also by the DNC.
Well,
And
they're one and the same.
well,
The DNC washes the big money.
yes, it washes the big money, but there's also the super PAC money. And that is huge this year. Huge in the primaries. Really, really awful. So tomorrow we'll be talking about that. And we'll be talking about ways to get around that. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about using swarm organizing to dump the incumbents, which should make for an interesting discussion.
Lots to talk about.
So we'll see you all tomorrow evening. Have a wonderful rest of the night and a wonderful day tomorrow.
Good job, Joe.
Touch. And great job, Lisa.
See y'all. Thanks for being here, as usual. Love you, everybody. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Night, Joe.
And good night, Lisa. Well, good night again, everybody. I'm leaving too.